conversations continue now on The Maggie Linton Show.
Well, welcome back. Later this hour, entrepreneur, advocate, author, husband, and father G. Todd Taylor with his new children's book, Dad, Who Will I Be? But we begin the hour with a woman's perspective on the Secret Service. Sue Ann Baker was one of the first 5 females hired by the agency and shares all with her memoir, Behind the Shades, a female Secret Service agent's true story. Welcome, Sue Ann.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be invited to be on your program.
Well, listen, it is an honor to have you because I just, happy 150th anniversary, really? And you weren't sworn in until 1970. It's like, what up with that?
Well, yeah, I'm glad I'm not 150 years
old.
old.
But I still, that long before they recognize that women can do good?
Well, I think, it became evident from the 70s when the Gloria Steinem and the women's liberation movement was just getting started, and I think it was raising a lot of people's awareness that there was a need for more women in occupations that traditionally we had never been in before.
Yeah. You talk about that before we get to your first assignment with Can You Protect the Princess, Please? Which I don't know who was tougher, the head counselors or, whatever. Anyway, let's begin with your growing up and you realizing early on you really wanted to do something just a little bit different. You knew you didn't want to be a secretary or a teacher.
That's true. And when I grew up in the 60s and 70s, there were a limited number of opportunities for women. And even though my family was loving and my dad told me I could be anything I wanted to be when I grew up, every time I came up with something, he shot it down. And I'm not sure why. Maybe I just kept wanting to be something outside of his expectations of me as a woman back then. But I remember my first career choice was to be a boxer. Mm-hmm. And my dad sat me down and he explained how little girls grew up and would get hurt if they boxed. And I was disappointed, but not for too long. And the next thing I came up with is I wanted to be a fireman or a minister or a police officer. And Dad sat me down a lot back then because he explained each time that those just weren't proper career choices for little girls. And I was just irrepressible. I mean, my heroes were Wonder Woman or Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. Mm-hmm. And I had a passion early on for adventure and a sense of striving for justice. So I didn't play with dolls back then. I climbed trees. Mm-hmm. Or I rode my bike down country roads for miles just to see where they would take me. And then as I became older, I had a sister that my mother explained to me had died before I was born in a tragic swing accident. Mm. And then 4 months later, she became pregnant with me, and they already had a 10-year-old son, but clearly they were hoping to have another little girl. And so I've always known I was loved and wanted, but I grew up, because of that story, wanting to make a difference. I was just determined to make my life count in something.
Yeah. And you did, and you have, and thank goodness you chose the career that you did. Talk about your schooling, though, because Maryland, Washington, D.C., it's that training had a little bit of a hink in the curve, didn't it?
Well, we didn't have a lot of training.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's like, what do we do with these women?
That's right. I think that the Secret Service didn't quite know what to do with us, and we didn't know what to expect. We just grabbed that opportunity as it floated by. I think there's a lot of opportunities that people are presented with in their lifetime, and it's just a matter of discerning the good ones and being fearless enough to grab those unexpected opportunities and just go with it, even when you don't know where it's taking you. So there wasn't a lot of training to begin with. They vetted us for a year as White House police officers, but we didn't have any uniforms, so we couldn't do the same job as the men did. And after about a year, they had kept pulling us out to work with Secret Service agents to protect foreign dignitaries and their wives. But we, like I said, had no training in protection. I mean, we knew firearms and had gone through pistol courses, but it was hard. And then,
you know, I got the feeling at one point that they were almost hoping that you all would go away. And says, you know, if we can't find you a job, maybe you'll just go away. And they didn't know about people like you and the other four ladies, did they? No respect for you.
Well, I don't know. There were certainly some of that. I'm sure there were some male agents that wished we would go away, but it wasn't all of them. But it was tough because we were in a male-dominated organization. They had never had female agents for 106 years, and so we were kind of invading their territory, and it was difficult, I have to say.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about that first assignment. Can you guard a princess, please? Because you got sent to a camp.
Yes.
A children's camp.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Camp Oneca in the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania. And I don't know why they picked me out of the other 5 or the other 4, but I was assigned to protect Princess Caroline Grimaldi of Monaco. She was the daughter of Grace Kelly and Prince Rainier. They had wanted her to have just a normal camping experience as a 14-year-old girl, and they decided they didn't want any protection of her. So I don't know who made the decision that the Secret Service would protect her anyway, but because the prince and the princess didn't want their daughter protected, they sent me in undercover. So nobody knew who I was as an agent other than the 2 women who owned the camp and the camp nurse. And then ultimately I found out that there were 2 other counselors they had confided in to help me make that transition into this, what was a pretty close society of
very
campers.
well-to-do.
Yes,
campers.
And very well-to-do mainline people from Philadelphia. So there I was, winging it, trying to figure out how to get through that and not let her know. And they took my gun away from me because they thought that the kids might find it. So the gun was in the nurse's office, which was like 50 yards from where my tent was. And I just hoped that if somebody was trying to kidnap her and she screamed, I could run out and do something, gunless.
And so that was one among many stories that you will hear in Behind the Shades, a female Secret Service agent's true story, and their memoir is by Sue Baker. Sue, you really were, like you said, on the forefront. Your first big assignment, though, had to do with going to Hawaii and relieving another female agent.
Yes. We actually weren't agents at that point.
Yeah.
We were still White House Police. Well, they called them Executive Protective Service at that time. And she had been sent over there to help protect the wife of the Prime Minister of Cambodia, Lon Nol. And he had been flown to Hawaii because he had had a stroke. And he was really friendly to the United States. He was allowing our planes to land in Cambodia during the Vietnam War. So it was in our interest to keep him alive and hopefully get him healthier. And I don't remember how long that other woman was in Hawaii, but they finally decided to give her a break and let her come home, and they sent me over. And that was absolutely my first assignment. And I hadn't even been, I don't think, west of the Mississippi. So it was pretty exciting for me to go to Hawaii and deal with language issues. I didn't speak Cambodian. She didn't speak English. And yet there were parts of it that felt like a vacation because it was such a beautiful place to be. But I also understood that what my job was really serious, and that was to take a bullet for her if necessary. So that finally sunk in.
Yeah. And the sinking in also gave you a real insight into, as you said, your intuition, what it really means to protect, but do it in a less invasive sort of way.
Right. I think that intuition is a really mysterious thing that I think women especially seem to have.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably comes from caveman days when women had to be really acutely aware of their surroundings so that they could protect their children. I think it's probably the same today. And I'm not sure that it's something that you can be trained in, other than to just be really observant of what's going on around you. And, there's a saying that always trust your first gut instincts. Like if you genuinely feel in your heart, in your soul, that something's wrong, it usually is. Fortunately, I didn't have any of those intuitions or feelings that popped up when I was in Hawaii, but I actually was probably, if there was training involved, it was to be aware of what's not normal. What do you expect? And then all of a sudden something on the back of your neck, the hair rises on the back of your neck, and you just don't feel right about a situation. Get out of the situation.
It's the old saying nowadays it seems like the old saying when we, go into public places, if you see something, say something. And it's like you said, that little hair on the back of your neck, that intuition. If something doesn't feel right, whether you're a Secret Service agent or anybody else, it really is in your best example to really speak up about it. Yeah,
I think so. I think, let's talk about like dating, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
This is a perfect example. You start dating somebody, and as charming as he or she may be at first, maybe they start not accepting no for an answer, but rather they start complaining about how you do things and what you wear and who your friends are. And those are all signs that that person is trying to control you, which is not a good situation. Because a person who needs to control you can sometimes end up abusing you psychologically, if not physically. And so, again, if you get that eerie feeling in your gut that's screaming at you that things might not be as they appear, you need to listen to it.
Mm-hmm. Very true. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Secret Service and you finally getting in, being a real agent, and realizing that you were setting an example for those who were to follow, and not feeling it as a burden, but in a sense as an honor.
Well, I think it was, but I'm not sure that any of us were particularly introspective in those days. You have to have some years on you to be able to look back. And frankly, it wasn't until 2007 when this young agent who was in charge of Women's History Month brought all 5 of us back to Washington, D.C. for a panel discussion at the Secret Service headquarters that I realized I was old enough to be history. So we were, at the time, all 5 of us kind of just thought we were just really happy to have a job. Mm-hmm. But we were aware that we were the first and that we were breaking a glass ceiling. And even though they didn't have us doing hardly anything together, I mean, they were sending us in all different directions, we were all acutely aware that we didn't want to mess up for future agents, for females. So it was a burden, I think, that we were just aware of, and we were just trying to gain everybody's respect and be an agent.
Mm-hmm. And you got a little flirting along the way, huh? From Russia with Love?
Yes. You clearly have read the book. Yes, there was a couple of times. There was a KGB agent, actually, that flirted with me, and in his broken English, and then also a Czechoslovakian, Yugoslavian person when I was protecting Tito. And it was really, as I think back on it, it was really cute because of the language barriers. Everybody would try to speak what they knew, a few words in German or a few words in French, and then finally, pucker up and make like he wanted to kiss me, and I would get the idea. It's like, thanks, but no thanks. I'm staying here.
Yeah. You really, you were part of such an interesting part of history, because you talk about Shirley Chisholm, you talk about Tricia Nixon's wedding. Well, of course, there are always Secret Service agents and stuff around there, but you set the whole table. Rain, not the most best time for a wedding when it's pouring outside, and some of the other things that you needed to take care of.
Yes, it was an honor to pretend to be Tricia Nixon. And that part of the story is that, the media, excuse me, that you're part of.
It's true. They're ridiculous.
Yes. We're always interested in following, Tricia Nixon, especially after her wedding, to see where she went. And so they used me and another male agent and put us in a limousine in the back. And we went out to Southgate, I think it was, and drove around Washington, D.C., trying to lure the media away from the White House. They didn't fall for it, but at the time, I had a lot of fun just pretending I was Tricia Nixon. I had blonde hair, and I had it up, in a style like hers. And so we waved at a lot of people in Washington, and I'm sure there's stories about, hey, I saw Tricia Nixon on her wedding day. And it wasn't. It was me.
Yeah. The other thing you talk about was being there the day the Nixons left for China.
Yes, I was on the tarmac at Andrews Air Force Base, and I remember it so well because, again, it was a torrential rainstorm.
Yeah, another rainy day.
It was torrential, and you don't stand there with an umbrella over your head as a Secret Service agent. I mean, so I was just trying to keep my radio out of the rain and my purse under my coat, but I literally was soaked to my underwear. And yet I was truly aware that I was witnessing history. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think any U.S. president at that time had even been to China. So Nixon's trip to China was a big deal because it opened up those doors for relationships in the future.
That still exists to this day. Once again, we are talking with the Behind the Shades, a female Secret Service agent's true story. It is Sue Ann Baker, one of the first 5 females hired by the agency, and she shares all in this memoir, Behind the Shades. As we go through that chapter, though, and when you talk about the day that George Wallace was shot in Laurel, Maryland, which a lot of people do not realize that's where he was shot, that's what put him in the wheelchair, and you talk about being in the radio room and then headed out to there to help intercede on that. Yes, I think it's when it's the extraordinary circumstances that you remember so well, because I remember standing in the communications or the radio room in the field office in Washington, D.C. when all this chatter came over the radio that Wallace had been shot, and my supervisor sent myself and 2 other male agents out to Laurel to do interviews, and we were like screaming down the freeway on the wrong side, I finally said to the agent, I said, come on, slow down. The guy's already been shot. Let's get there alive. And so he finally pulled over the median strip, and we proceeded to Laurel. And I remember interviewing maybe 3 or 4 different people. Nobody had seen the shooting except one person, but he didn't know the shooter, Arthur Bremer. Mm-hmm. And then they sent me to the hospital where George Wallace had been taken, and I was to stand guard or help protect Mrs. Wallace. And that was, I think if there was a time that it sunk in of what I had signed up for, it was then. I mean, she was really gracious to me. She still had blood all over her white outfit, and she was pretty shaken, obviously, and he was still in surgery. And so I had, I don't know, maybe a half hour, an hour to sit with her until I was relieved. But I was relieved by a male agent. He just stood outside the door. I was sitting in there with her and gave her a big hug goodbye and drove home. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, another story that made me smile was you guarding Shirley Chisholm when she decided she was going to run for president.
Yes, she was just such a wonderful lady. I know I wrote home to my parents that she was a brilliant speaker, and I had decided she was the only honest, sincere, down-to-earth, dedicated politician I'd ever met. She was a little petite thing, but she could really jazz up a crowd with her speaking abilities and get them going. And her slogan was to be unbought and unbossed, and she wrote a book by that.
That was her memoir.
That was her memoir.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And you said two of the nicest people you ever met, but when you first went there and was securing her house and just walking around the perimeter every half hour, you go, okay, this is what I signed up for. And, again, it's that little bit of humor that you interject all throughout that kind of is a wake-up call, because no matter what job it is, there's going to be something boring about it.
Oh, that's for sure. Yeah. Yeah, standing post of a building and securing it is not fun.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty mundane, but somebody's got to do it.
Well, you have had quite a career stepping among the great, and then being so much of a person who was helping make a difference. But talk about the Secret Service as you see it today. They've had a pretty rough year and a half, 2 years, and it's mainly been the bad boys. I haven't heard anything about a woman.
That's true. That's one of my mantras.
Exactly.
Actually, it's been 3 years since Cartagena,
okay,
and yet there's only been about 20 agents that have been bad boys, that have done things that weren't wise, that have brought embarrassment to the service, and that's really been less than 1% of the male agents. But as you point out, and as I like to point out, not one of those agents that got into trouble was a woman.
Very true.
So.
Very
maybe
true.
there's a lesson to be learned there, that they should hire more women.
The other thing you point out in your book is the need to hire more minorities also.
Well, yes, I think that's an ongoing issue, that they're always trying to get minorities, from American Indians to Afro-Americans. I think you said you knew Charlie Gittens?
Yeah, I've met him, but
okay.
I didn't know him personally, yeah.
Yeah. He was my boss, our first boss in Washington, D.C. in the field office, and he was the first African-American male agent that they ever hired. So he was in a great position to understand how we were feeling being a minority, and was just wonderful to us, and also to me, because I requested to be transferred to Los Angeles, and I was the first female agent out of the cocoon of Washington, D.C., and he helped facilitate that. So I was always grateful to him for that.
When you mentioned the cocoon, it's so much of what you did was right in the Washington, D.C. area. It was like they were afraid to let you ladies out of their sight or something,
Well, I think, like I said, they weren't quite sure how to use us, and we did a lot of protection, and you get that in Washington, D.C. I also worked on the check squad and the counterfeiting squad, but there was only talk about moving us to large cities where we could work undercover. So the choices were like New York City or Miami or Chicago or L.A., and I thought at that time that the epitome of being an agent was working undercover on counterfeit money investigations. And there was a lot of that in Los Angeles. And after the campaign, I really wanted out of protection. I was tired of that. I'd been also on the campaign trail with Eleanor McGovern, and that was really grueling, because I didn't have a day off for months.
Yeah.
So, yeah, getting out of LA and getting into a larger field office where they could use me undercover was a great thing, because it gave me more experience.
And that you did. You got a lot more experience, got to meet a few people that you were thrilled to meet, Ray Charles and and others, and Steve Allen. And you talk about that. That's kind of like the little icing on the cake sometimes that comes with the job.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's always exciting to have those kinds of things happening, because that's clearly more exciting than standing post in a back door of someplace. And I think that even though, you're an agent, you can still be starstruck, as I clearly was when I was 25 years old, to be meeting those kinds of great people and entertainers.
Well, I'll tell you, I've found it a really fascinating memoir. If you could tell a young woman out there who may be looking toward a career within the Secret Service, what would you tell her?
If she was looking for it, I would say go after it. They don't hire very many people, so it's quite an honor to be hired as an agent. She should also be prepared that she will be a minority, and it's still tough, even though I think it's a lot easier today than it was when I started. She needs to be prepared to be able to shoot a gun and use it whenever is necessary, and to be able to carry out assignments no matter how dangerous they are. And that it's a lifestyle. It's not just a career, and it's not just a job. It's an actual lifestyle, and you need to be prepared to be really, truly committed to it.
All right. I'm going to leave it at that. Listen, thank you very much. It is former Secret Service agent Sue Ann Baker. Her memoir again is Behind the Shades, a female Secret Service agent's true story. It's available at Amazon.com and other locations. More at her website, SueAnnBaker.com, on Facebook, and she tweets at Sue Ann Baker too. Thank you, Sue Ann.
Okay, thank you so much, Maggie.
Continued happiness and success.
Thank you. Same to you.
All right. You don't need to get your eyes checked. You don't need to recalculate the total, and no one's pulling an elaborate prank on you. That number on your current satellite TV bill is high. Are you ready for a lower bill? Call 1-800-CALL-DISH today and switch to Dish. Dish provides the same HD service, gives you the same channels and sports you love. They even have offers that other satellite providers don't, like no fee for regional sports networks and no first receiver fee. Why pay more? It's a no-brainer. Dish is a better value. Stop staring at your costly bill and pick up the phone. Call 1-800-CALL-DISH and talk to a customer representative. One simple call can start saving you money. Get the same great shows and better quality service, all for a lower price. Call 1-800-CALL-DISH and switch to Dish today. 24-month commitment and credit qualification required. Cancellation fee, monthly equipment fees, auto pay, and paperless billing and other restrictions apply. When we return, some uplifting thoughts from G. Todd Taylor. Stay tuned.
Featuring guests that highlight everyday life. You are listening to The Maggie Linton Show on Sirius XM Urban View.